Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
In the summer of 2013, a 19-year-old college student named Danny took a part-time job at a KFC on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee. It was one of those older franchises, the kind with faded red stripes, flickering neon signs, and a grease-coated charm that smelled more like memory than food. Danny needed money for school, and the night shift seemed perfect. Less hassle, less traffic, and fewer customers. But he didn't know that the place had a story no one told during training. His manager, Keith, was a hard-nosed ex-military guy with no patience for jokes or lateness. On Danny's second week, Keith pulled him aside and said, "If you're closing, never stay past 1:13 a.m. If something delays you, leave things undone. Lock up and go, no matter what." Danny laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Keith didn't smile. That first few weeks were uneventful, though Danny noticed strange things. Sometimes the fryer would beep on its own. Sometimes the freezer door would swing open even when it had been locked. Sometimes he'd hear soft knocks from inside the walk-in fridge. When he told Keith, all he said was, "Just don't be here past 1:13. But one Friday night, the closing shift dragged. A family of 6 came in 5 minutes before close and stayed nearly an hour. Danny was irritated, but tried to stay professional. By the time he finished cleaning the fryers and scrubbing the floors, it was already 1:05 a.m. He knew he wouldn't make it in time. He texted Keith, "Running late, should be out by 1:25. No reply. The minute the clock ticked past 1:13, the power flickered. The buzzing fluorescence above dimmed for a moment, then came back. But something felt wrong. The air felt thicker, greasy, and cold at the same time. He heard the back door slam, even though he'd locked it earlier. Thinking maybe someone had broken in, he grabbed the mop handle like a bat and crept toward the kitchen. That's when he saw it. Standing near the fryer was a man in a filthy old KFC uniform. His skin was blistered and red as if he'd been burned. His mouth hung open, lips melted together. Grease dripped from his hands. His name tag read James, a name Danny didn't recognize. James slowly raised one hand and pointed at the fryer. Danny backed away, whispering, "Hey man, you're not supposed to be back here." The figure didn't respond. It just turned its head, slowly, unnaturally, and fixed hollow eyes on Danny. Then it lunged. Danny ran. He didn't scream. He didn't look back. He bolted out the front door, keys still in his hand, and didn't stop running until he reached the gas station down the road. When police checked the restaurant later, they found nothing. No signs of break-in, no damage. But on the security cameras, the footage was corrupted from 1:13 to 1:26 a.m., completely blank. Keith didn't say a word when Danny returned the next morning to quit, just nodded like he'd been expecting it. Before Danny left, Keith handed him an old yellowed newspaper clipping. It was from 1998. The headline read, "Employee dies after falling into deep fryer at local KFC." The article said his name was James Cole. He'd been working the night shift. No one found his body until the next morning. It was ruled an accident, but other employees started quitting after reporting strange occurrences. The location shut down 2 years later and reopened under new management. Danny never worked in food service again. He never ate KFC again either. But sometimes, when he passes a drive-thru late at night, he swears he smells something burning, something more than just chicken. And if he ever sees a KFC open after 1 a.m., he keeps driving. Always.
Story number 2.
In 2011, a young woman named Claire moved to a quiet suburban town for a fresh start. She had recently ended a long-term relationship and thought that a change of scenery would provide the emotional reset she needed. As she settled into her new home, a small apartment above a local KFC, she noticed peculiar things about her surroundings. The apartment itself was quaint, but the building's history felt heavy, like an old memory lingering just below the surface. Claire's neighbors were friendly, but the restaurant below her seemed to be perpetually stuck in a time warp. The place never seemed particularly busy, but the smell of fried chicken would occasionally flood the hallway, lingering longer than was typical for a fast food joint. The kitchen, she learned, had a distinctively haunting atmosphere, with an air of oppressive warmth and a constant hum from the deep fryers that seemed unnervingly persistent. One evening, during her third week of living there, Claire returned home late. having worked overtime at her job. As she approached the stairs leading to her apartment, she noticed a faint figure standing by the front door of the restaurant. It was a man, dressed in an old, worn-out KFC uniform. He was staring at the floor, his face obscured by his unkempt hair. Claire paused, a chill creeping up her spine. There was something about him that didn't seem quite right. He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her presence. She hurried past, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. The next morning, she went down to the restaurant to grab a coffee before heading out for the day. As she walked in, the manager, Tom, greeted her with a strained smile, which immediately struck her as odd. There was something in his eyes, fear perhaps, but he quickly masked it behind a professional demeanor. When she asked about the man she'd seen the night before, Tom seemed momentarily taken aback. "Oh, him? That's Bill," Tom replied, his voice shaky. "He's been working here for years, but you won't see him much anymore. We don't talk about him much." Claire, intrigued, pressed for more details, but Tom merely shook his head and changed the subject. Later that evening, she returned to her apartment after another late night at work. As she passed the kitchen, she could hear faint laughter, muffled but unmistakable. She figured it was just another worker's break, but when she peeked through the kitchen window, she froze. Inside, the kitchen was dark. The lights were off, but the fryers still hummed with life, and a figure moved within the shadows. It was Bill, standing motionless by the fryer, his face still obscured by his hair. But there was something different about him now. His body seemed thinner, almost skeletal, and his skin was unnaturally pale. Claire's heart raced. She quickly retreated to her apartment and locked the door, feeling an overpowering sense of dread wash over her. She called the landlord the next day, demanding to know more about the restaurant's history, but was only told vague stories about previous owners and odd occurrences. Nothing concrete. Over the next few days, the strange happenings escalated. Claire began hearing noises at odd hours, scraping sounds like metal against metal, followed by the distinct smell of frying chicken. Late one night, as she walked through the hallway toward her apartment, she saw the same figure again, Bill, standing in the doorway of the restaurant. This time, however, his posture was even more unnerving. He stood with his head tilted backward, as if staring up into the dark recesses of the restaurant's ceiling. Without thinking, Claire stepped forward, her curiosity outweighing her fear. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard a faint, raspy voice coming from the figure. It was barely audible, but the words chilled her to the bone. "They never let me leave." Terrified, Claire fled back to her apartment, and after that night, she made arrangements to move out of the building. When she finally left, the landlord, having heard about her experiences, confided in her that there had been an incident many years ago involving a former employee named Bill. He had been working the night shift alone when he fell into the deep fryer. It was a horrific accident, and he died from his injuries. But no one knew what really happened in those final moments, why the fryer had been left running, why no one had heard his screams. Claire never returned to that town. She eventually moved to a different city, far from the place she had once thought would bring her peace. But sometimes, late at night, she still smells the faintest trace of fried chicken in the air, an ever-present reminder that some places, some people, never truly leave.
Story number 3.
In the small town of Lakewood, a local KFC had been around for decades, nestled in the heart of the town's main street. It was one of those places everyone knew, where the comfort food was a tradition, and the same faces worked behind the counter year after year. The building, though old, was well maintained, and the bright red sign had stood proud through countless storms and seasons. But there was a dark history behind those walls, one that had been all but forgotten by the townspeople, until it wasn't. It started in the winter of 2005. A new employee named Amy, a college student needing extra cash, took a night shift at the KFC. She wasn't new to working in fast food, but had heard strange things about the restaurant's past, things people didn't really talk about. Old-timers spoke in hushed tones of the night shifts and how employees had often quit, their stories too bizarre to be true. Amy was skeptical, of course, chalking it up to superstition and local lore. But as she worked, she began to notice odd things. First, it was the phone calls. The restaurant's landline would ring at odd hours, and when Amy picked it up, there was nothing on the other end, just static. Then, the lights would flicker. At first, it was just a small flicker in the back kitchen, but it soon became more frequent, especially late at night. The worst part? The kitchen always smelled faintly of something burnt. Not the grease or chicken that was being fried, but something darker, something rotting. One night, Amy worked the graveyard shift alone. By 2 a.m., the place was empty, and the kitchen was finally quiet. She started cleaning the counters, humming to herself to pass the time. That's when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone shuffling in the back storage room. Thinking it was just another late-night delivery person, Amy walked into the back. The storage room was cold, much colder than the rest of the building, and it had a damp smell to it. But there was no delivery truck in sight. Instead, there was a tall man standing by the freezer, his back to her. He was dressed in an old faded KFC uniform. His hair was long and unkempt, and his movements were slow, almost as if he were stiff, like a mannequin. "Hey, you need something?" Amy called out, her voice betraying her nervousness. The man didn't respond. Amy hesitated, then approached him. When she got closer, she realized something was terribly wrong. The man's skin was pale, almost translucent, and his face was twisted in a permanent grimace. His eyes were completely white, like lifeless orbs, and his mouth hung open as though in mid-scream, though no sound came out. Without thinking, Amy backed away slowly, bumping into the freezer door in her panic. The man turned to face her. The light flickered above them, casting shadows across his face. And then, as if on cue, he spoke, his voice low and raspy, like it was being dragged across a chalkboard. "Help me, I can't leave." Amy screamed, running from the room and out the back door into the alley behind the restaurant. She didn't stop until she reached her car, slamming the door behind her and locking it. Her heart pounded, and for the first time, she didn't feel the comfort of the small town around her. She felt hunted. The next day, Amy tried to tell her manager, but he just laughed it off. "Oh, that's just Harold. He worked here for years until he didn't." He went on to explain that Harold, a former night shift worker, had mysteriously disappeared one cold night, never to be seen again. It was a local legend of sorts, though most people had chalked it up to him quitting in the middle of a shift. But some said he hadn't quit at all. Some said he had simply vanished. Amy didn't stay long after that. She never returned to that KFC again. The manager had warned her to stay away from the back storage room if she didn't want to see Harold again. She left town shortly after, unable to shake the image of that man's face from her mind. The KFC in Lakewood shut down a few years later, but every so often, someone will claim to have seen a figure lingering near the building late at night, standing in front of the broken sign, staring up at the dark windows. The smell of burnt chicken still lingers in the air, carried on the cold wind. And in the dead of winter, if you happen to pass by that restaurant, you might hear the faint sound of someone calling out, "Help me," from within.
Story number 4.
In a remote town in West Virginia, nestled between dense woods and jagged hills, there was a KFC that no one spoke about. It wasn't like the others in nearby towns. This one had a strange history. Locals avoided it, but tourists who passed through often made the mistake of stopping by, drawn by its lonely, faded charm. They never stayed long enough to regret it. In 1999, a young man named Luke took a job at that KFC. He was fresh out of high school, and the pay was good enough to get him through his first year of college. When Luke started, there were only a handful of workers, and most of them kept to themselves. The restaurant had an odd vibe, always too quiet, even when it was busy. There was an underlying tension, like something was just waiting to happen. At first, Luke didn't notice anything strange. He worked the late shifts, mostly alone after midnight, when the final customers trickled out and the night crew came in. But after a few weeks, he began to feel like he was being watched by something more than just the occasional customer. It started with small things. The sounds of footsteps echoing when no one else was around. The smell of fried chicken, even when the fryers were off and everything was shut down for the night. A light flickering in the back kitchen, though the rest of the restaurant seemed perfectly fine. And the worst, he could never seem to get the doors to lock properly. no matter how many times he checked. One particularly quiet night, when Luke was closing up, he was sure he heard something from the walk-in freezer. At first, he thought it was just the hum of the freezer kicking on, but then it sounded like a muffled voice, low and gurgling. He hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a flashlight and walked to the back. The freezer was cold, but not unusually so. The light from his flashlight cast a long shadow on the floor, but the air felt wrong, thick, almost oppressive. He approached the freezer door, and as he swung it open, the smell hit him. It wasn't the typical scent of meat and frozen food. It was rancid, like decay. In the corner of the freezer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure hunched over its back to him. The shape was covered in something sticky and black, almost like tar. As Luke took a step closer, the figure turned to face him, and his heart stopped. The face was the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. It wasn't human, not really. Its eyes were empty sockets, and its mouth was stretched wide, unnaturally so, with teeth that looked like broken shards of glass. The thing didn't move, but Luke felt its gaze pierce through him. "Get out!" The voice came, rasping, like it was being dragged through dirt. It was barely a whisper, but it shook Luke to his core. Without a second thought, Luke ran, slamming the freezer door behind him and locking it. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his things and rushed to leave. He ran through the back kitchen, ignoring the flickering lights, and didn't stop until he was out of the building, gasping for breath in the cold night air. The next day, Luke reported what had happened to his manager, but the man just looked at him with a strange, tired expression. "You saw it, didn't you?" the manager asked quietly, as if he already knew. "The thing in the freezer? It's been there for years. We don't talk about it, but it's been here a long time." Luke didn't press for more answers. He didn't need to. He quit that day. Years later, the KFC closed down. Locals said it had been haunted by something dark, a spirit that had attached itself to the building, feeding on those who worked there. Some even claimed that it had been the result of a tragic accident. A worker who had died in the freezer, his body left behind by careless management, forgotten for days. But the building didn't stay empty for long. New businesses came and went, but each one eventually folded, unable to survive. And anyone who dared to work late at night said they could still hear the footsteps, the voice, and that horrible smell wafting out of the freezer, beckoning the next unsuspecting soul. Even now, the KFC is abandoned. But when the moon is full, people passing by swear they can see a figure standing in the window, staring out at the darkened street. And if you're brave enough to get close, you might hear it too, the low, gurgling whisper, "Get out."
Story number 5.
In the fall of 2008, there was a strange incident involving a KFC in a quiet Texas suburb that has since become the center of dark urban legends whispered by the locals. But almost no one outside the town has heard what really happened. The restaurant had been around since the early 80s, small, off the main highway, with a mostly older staff who had worked there for years. It was known for being reliable, a comfortable stop for families and travelers alike. That changed after a new hire named Jordan started working the night shift. Jordan was 22, easygoing, a bit skeptical of ghost stories, and had just moved into town from Austin. He took the KFC job while searching for something better. During his first week, a coworker named Reggie, a guy in his 40s who had worked at the location for over a decade, pulled him aside one evening. "Don't ever answer the back door after close," Reggie warned. "No matter who's knocking, just don't." Jordan laughed, thinking it was hazing. "Why? Is the colonel going to get me?" Reggie didn't smile. "No, but something else might." That same night, right around 12:45 a.m., long after the last customer had left, Jordan was wiping down counters when he heard a soft knock. Not from the front, but from the back delivery door, the one that led to the alley behind the restaurant. He froze. Another knock, louder this time. 3 rhythmic, deliberate hits. He walked to the security camera screen near the office to see who it was. There was no one there. Thinking it might be a glitch, he decided to check the alley. He flipped on the exterior lights and opened the back door. The alley was empty. As he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. Chicken bones. Piles of them. Hundreds, scattered across the concrete like they'd been dumped from a dozen trash bags. They were wet, some still had bits of skin on them, and they reeked of rot, like they'd been sitting out in the heat for days. But the dumpster hadn't been emptied recently. No one had taken out trash. Then he saw it. At the far end of the alley, just where the light stopped and the shadows began, stood a tall, emaciated figure. Its skin was tight and waxy, like it had been stretched too thin over its bones. Its face wasn't a face at all, just a long slit where the mouth should have been and two deep, empty eye sockets. Jordan froze. The figure didn't move, but its head tilted slowly, curiously, as if trying to smell him. The air suddenly felt thick, like breathing through oil. Jordan stepped backward, back inside, slammed the door, and locked it. He rushed to the front to grab his phone, but found the screen shattered, as if it had been dropped, except he hadn't touched it since clocking in. Then the knocking started again, louder, faster, angry. The walls shook with each bang. The lights began flickering wildly, and every fryer in the kitchen turned on their own, as oil bubbled and popped violently in empty baskets. The sound of the knocking was now joined by another sound, a rasping voice whispering behind the door. "More, I need more." Jordan ran to the office and hid under the desk, holding his breath as the fryers hissed louder and louder, filling the restaurant with smoke. Then, silence. When he finally worked up the nerve to leave the office, everything had stopped. The fryers were off. The kitchen was clean. The smoke had vanished, but the bones were still there, piled by the back door, forming a perfect circle. Jordan quit the next morning. Reggie didn't even ask why. "They always do," he muttered. "If you answer the knocking once, it remembers you. Keeps coming back, asking for more." The KFC was shut down for remodeling a month later, but never reopened. Locals say the building's cursed, that something was buried beneath it long before it was ever built. Something that got hungry. Now it just sits there, rotting like the bones in the alley, windows boarded up but never truly silent. Travelers passing by claim they sometimes see lights flicker inside, even though the power's been shut off for years. Some even hear knocking, and every so often someone's pet goes missing in the neighborhood. Found days later in the woods, torn apart. Bones picked clean, always in a perfect circle.
Story number 6.
In 2016, a KFC in northern Ohio became the center of a terrifying mystery that no one at corporate ever publicly addressed. It was located in a quiet industrial part of town, far from schools and homes, surrounded by overgrown lots and rusted warehouses. Most of the employees were part-timers, kids from the nearby tech college looking for flexible night shifts. One of them was Darren, a 20-year-old film student who took the job because it was easy money and good material for the horror scripts he loved to write. It didn't take long for him to realize that something about the store was off. For one, there were no clocks anywhere. Not in the kitchen, not in the office, not even in the dining room. The only way to check the time was your own phone, which everyone kept on them. If you asked the manager why, he'd just say, "We don't want employees watching the clock." But that wasn't the real reason. Then there were the videos. Each morning, employees had to record and submit a short clip from the security feed as part of a routine check, just 30 seconds from around 3 a.m., supposedly to ensure night crew safety. Darren didn't think much of it until one night, while on his break, he decided to look through the past submissions on the manager's computer. All the 3 a.m. clips had something strange in common. No matter who was working or how the cameras were positioned, every single clip between 2:59 and 3:01 a.m. had a flicker, barely noticeable. A blur that moved through the dining area or near the walk-in freezer. Darren slowed down one of the videos frame by frame, and that's when he saw it. A pale figure, humanoid, crouched under one of the booths in the far back of the dining room. Its limbs were long and bent wrong, its face hidden in shadow. It appeared in a single frame and was gone the next. Thinking it was a prank, Darren showed it to his coworker, Ellie, who had been working at the store for nearly a year. Her face drained of color. "I've seen it," she whispered. "But I didn't know it showed up on camera." According to her, employees had been seeing things out of the corner of their eyes during the 3 a.m. hour for months. A flicker in the freezer's reflection, an extra shadow in the mop closet. Once, Ellie had gone to the walk-in cooler at 3:02 a.m. and the door slammed behind her. She was locked in for 10 minutes, and when she was finally let out, she swore she heard someone whisper her name from inside the walls. Darren decided to stay late one night and test it himself. He set up his phone to record the dining area from a high corner shelf, leaving it on time-lapse. Then, at 2:58 a.m., he sat alone by the window, watching the reflection in the glass. At exactly 3 a.m., something shifted. The fluorescent lights above the counter buzzed louder, flickered once, and dimmed, but didn't fully go out. The temperature dropped instantly, and the glass in the front window fogged up from the inside. That's when he saw it, not in front of him, but in the reflection. Something crawling out from under the booth. It moved unnaturally, like its joints bent backward. It had no clothes, no hair, and its skin was a sickly grayish pink. Its face was flat and eyeless, but its mouth stretched wide, too wide, splitting at the corners into a grin that made Darren feel physically ill. It turned its head slowly toward his reflection. It knew he was watching. He blinked, and it was gone. Darren lunged for his phone, heart racing, and reviewed the footage. It was there, just for 3 frames, crawling, then gone. But as he scrubbed the footage further, he noticed something else. In the very last second of the clip, the creature was standing, not crawling, and it was behind him. He turned around so fast he nearly fell, but nothing was there. The next morning, Darren quit. He deleted the video. But later that night, he got a text from an unknown number. No words, just an image, a blurry screenshot, 1 frame from the video he had deleted. It showed him sitting at the booth, and the thing's hand resting on his shoulder. He moved out of state a month later, blocked the number, changed his phone. He doesn't eat at KFC anymore, and he never works night shifts. But sometimes when he's up late editing his films, he'll catch his own reflection in the screen, sitting in his chair, face lit by the monitor. And just for a second, he swears he's something hunched low in the background, grinning, waiting for 3 a.m. to hit.
Story number 7.
In 2010, there was a small, family-owned KFC in the sleepy town of Briar Hollow, located near a stretch of woods that locals often referred to as the Hollow. The KFC, though part of a franchise, felt more like a hole in the wall. The building was old, nestled between 2 overgrown trees that blocked out most of the daylight. Inside, the walls were chipped, the floors worn down by decades of traffic, and the booths cracked with age. But it was a place where the town gathered, mostly for lunch or the occasional dinner on weekends. Most people didn't mind the quirks of the restaurant, except for a few oddities that never sat quite right with the staff. The KFC had a unique system. The kitchen was divided into 2 distinct halves, one side for preparation, the other for cooking. It was strange but functional, and the employees had become accustomed to it. At least they thought they had. It was on a foggy Tuesday night when this all began. The closing crew consisted of Sarah, a young woman who worked the late shifts to save for college, and Will, a man who'd been with the restaurant for years. Will was a quiet guy, serious, didn't say much, but he was dependable. Sarah, on the other hand, was talkative, friendly, always smiling. But that night, something in the air felt different. The moment Sarah arrived, Will was already there, and he seemed off. He didn't greet her. Instead, he just handed her a rag and told her to start wiping the tables. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her uneasy. It wasn't malicious, just cold, distant. The night went on like normal, customers trickling out by 9 p.m. until it was just Sarah and Will cleaning up. Will didn't speak much, and Sarah found herself fidgeting as she worked. She noticed a strange draft in the air and looked up to see the kitchen's back door, locked during normal hours, slightly ajar. "That's weird," she muttered, wiping her hands on the rag. "Did you open that?" Will didn't answer. Instead, he just glanced toward the door, his face pale in the dim light. "Just keep working," he said in a low voice. His words felt hollow, and there was a hesitation in his tone. Sarah tried to shake it off, chalking it up to the exhaustion of closing, but the door kept drawing her attention. It was slightly ajar, creaking ever so slightly with the wind. The faintest smell of something foul began to fill the air, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the chicken. It wasn't the grease. It was something darker. She finally walked over to the door and pushed it open. The night air was thick with fog, swirling around her. But the thing that caught her eye wasn't the weather. It was the ground. a patch of fresh dirt piled up just outside the door as if something had been buried there recently. Will was suddenly behind her. His voice was strained. "Close the door, Sarah. Don't go out there." She turned to him confused. "What's going on? Why are you acting like this?" Will stepped closer, his eyes wide. "You shouldn't have opened it. You shouldn't have seen it. It's waiting." Sarah stepped back, the knot in her stomach tightening. Waiting for what? He didn't answer her. Instead, he turned away and walked back into the kitchen. Sarah stood there, staring at the dirt, the fog rolling in deeper. She felt as though she was being pulled toward it, toward the earth. A sudden, almost primal urge to investigate the dirt gnawed at her, but she forced herself to turn and go back inside. That's when she heard it, a faint tapping, a scratching sound, like something clawing at the walls. It was coming from the back of the kitchen, the prep area. Sarah moved slowly toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. The tapping grew louder. It sounded like nails scraping against metal. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the back. She peeked around the corner into the dark prep area and saw Will standing there, his back to her, his hands pressed against the stainless steel sink. His shoulders were heaving, but what chilled her to the bone was the shadow behind him. Tall, unnaturally tall. It had the shape of a person bathed, but its limbs were elongated and twisted, and its body swayed unnaturally. "Will?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. The growl grew louder. She ran, out the door, into the fog, not caring if it was unsafe. But when she reached the parking lot, she turned back, just in time to see the back door of the KFC slowly closing behind her. And just before it clicked shut, she swore she saw Will's face through the small glass window, his eyes wide and empty. The next morning, Sarah didn't return to work. She called in sick, her voice barely audible on the phone. She couldn't explain what had happened, and she didn't want to. The thought of going back made her stomach churn. The restaurant closed down just a month later. Local authorities never found Will, and Sarah never spoke of that night again. Some say she had a breakdown, but others claim she left town altogether. And to this day, the old KFC still stands, empty and decaying in the fog. The townspeople have stopped driving past it, and no one talks about it. But if you're brave enough to walk near that place at night, when the fog is thick, you might hear the scratching again, scraping against metal, and a voice, barely a whisper, calling your name. Help me, before it comes for you too.
Story number 8.
In 2014, a small KFC on the outskirts of Charleston, West Virginia, became the site of one of the most disturbing and unexplainable events in the town's history. It was a quiet place, far from the bustling downtown area, nestled between two old gas stations and a few dilapidated motels. People came for the fried chicken, of course, but not many stayed long. There was something about that KFC that made you want to hurry up and leave. The employees had always been a little odd about the place. There were rumors circulating about the building being haunted, but most chalked it up to the fact that it was old, a relic from the 70s, with low ceilings, flickering lights, and a distinctly musty smell that never seemed to go away, no matter how much the staff cleaned. But the staff knew better than to talk about the odd occurrences that kept happening. It started with Sarah, a 19-year-old girl who worked as a cashier during the late shifts. Sarah was new to town and had taken the job to make ends meet while she looked for something more permanent. Her first few weeks at the KFC went smoothly enough, though she couldn't help but notice the strange atmosphere around the restaurant. The employees were skittish, the manager a little too distant, but Sarah figured it was just the nature of fast food work. After a couple of weeks, however, she began to feel that the restaurant was watching her. It wasn't until one late evening that she fully realized what was happening. Sarah was closing up for the night, wiping down tables, checking the floor for any leftover trash. The clock read 12:15 a.m. It was just her and the cook, Michael, who was in the back cleaning the kitchen. The restaurant was dead silent except for the hum of the refrigerators and the clink of dishes. Then, out of nowhere, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Her heart skipped. The restaurant had been empty for hours. Sarah stepped into the kitchen, expecting to see Michael, who was always in and out of the back rooms, but the room was empty. She called out for him, but there was no response. Then she heard something else, a soft tapping noise, like fingers drumming against the counter, coming from the other side of the room. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Her breath caught in her throat as the noise continued. Curious but terrified, Sarah moved toward the back door of the kitchen, which led out into the alley. She wasn't sure why she did it, but her feet carried her forward toward the sound. As she reached for the door, she noticed something odd. The lock had been tampered with. The bolt was partially pulled out, as though someone had tried to force the door open. She yanked the door open, her hand trembling. At first, she saw nothing. The alley was dark, save for the faint glow from the streetlights. But then, in the distance, she caught a glimpse of something, a figure just standing in the shadows. A man, his back to her. His clothes were ragged, his face hidden beneath a hood. He was holding something in his hand, a bucket of chicken, the same kind of bucket the restaurant used to serve its meals. But this was no ordinary bucket. It was too full. It seemed to bulge unnaturally, like it was packed with something heavy, too heavy for its size. "Hey!" Sarah called out, stepping forward, her voice sharp with fear. The figure didn't move. It didn't respond. It just stood there, still and silent. "Hey!" she called again, her voice cracking. "What are you doing?" Without warning, the figure turned around. Sarah froze. The man's face was pale, sickly white, with hollowed-out eyes that seemed too dark, too empty. His mouth was wide open, a grotesque, unnatural grin stretching from ear to ear, revealing rows of sharp, crooked teeth that looked almost too big for his mouth. He raised the bucket, holding it out toward her, as if offering it. But there was something inside that didn't belong. Something alive. Sarah screamed and backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned to run, but stopped when she heard something else. Guttural growls coming from the shadows, the sound of something large and hungry stirring. She didn't wait to look again. She slammed the door shut and locked it. Michael, who had been in the back, finally returned to the front of the restaurant. He looked at Sarah with an expression that was too calm, too knowing. "What happened?" he asked, as if it was a regular night. That man in the alley. He was holding a bucket of chicken, but there was something in it, something alive," Sarah stammered. Michael didn't seem surprised. He just nodded slowly, as if he had heard this before. "That's how it starts," he muttered. "What do you mean?" Sarah demanded. Michael looked at her with cold, tired eyes. "The buckets. They come for them. They always do. We feed them, or they feed us." The next morning, Sarah didn't return to work. She called in sick, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her at that KFC. The restaurant stayed open for another year before it shut down, seemingly without explanation. The windows were boarded up, the doors locked. No one ever mentioned Sarah again, and the new owners decided to tear it down. But sometimes late at night, when the wind picks up just right, you can still hear the tapping, the sound of something knocking on the walls, waiting for its next meal.